Okay, so let me tell you where we're at here, guys. These are the transmission cooling lines that have got to go up to our new radiator. Now, it's obvious that they don't fit, and I've actually cut the end off of these. You can see the one on the bottom down here, and this one. They got to come up to the radiator here. I knew they were too short, so what we did, down to the speed shop, and I got some AN fittings. I got the right combination of fittings. I haven't put this side on yet because I don't really know how long this needs to be. This is actually going to go into the transmission line here. This is the right setup, and it's on there and crimped and ready to go. On this end, I have the correct AN fittings to go on here, but I have to get these onto the steel hard lines first and then measure to the radiator and see where I need to cut these. Now, some of you guys are not going to like this. You're going to be, you're such a hack. Well, let me tell you something. I've done more than one S10 V8 conversion. You see what we got going on here. Sawzall, cut this open, peel the metal back. Listen, these transmissions are so tight in these S10s. If you try to get those transmission lines on from underneath, it's gonna be a terrible experience. Believe me, I've tried it. This is the third one I've done where I've cut the floor like this. And it's not like we're cutting up like a classic car here. It's an 85 S10. Come on. I mean, who cares? Not only that, my buddy's real good at sheet metal. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish cutting these off and trim this off. And he's going to make me an access panel here. We're going to take 3 sheets of 1/8 inch sheet metal. We're going to bolt or screw it in so that you won't even, it'll just be like a really nice patch panel. And then down the road, if you ever have to get to the transmission lines, you just pull the patch panel and you pull the lines. It's really simple. It is nearly impossible to get, I mean, there is literally no room between this floorboard and these fittings from underneath. I'm going to go ahead and get those on. I won't film all that, but I'll show you the end result when I'm done. So I've got these lines ironed out here. Okay, also here's another tip, guys. When you get under a vehicle, if you're lifting it, always use jack stands, and I always try to use more than one. If you notice, I got 2 jack stands here. That's redundancy, and I also keep the jack here handy. I keep a little pressure on the jack. Never get under a car or vehicle with just the jack, hydraulic jack holding it up, because that's how people die. So the jack gives way, the car falls on you, that's it for you. So always have more than one lifting mechanism or holding mechanism, and always make sure you have at least 1 jack stand. 2 is even better. So this is my column shifter here. Now if you'll notice, it's kind of bent back that way. The issue that we had was this piece came straight out, and I've got the shifter up in park right now. This has to go down to go into gear. We had to bend this back because it was actually hitting the valve cover. The other thing is the factory shifter here, which I want to do. I've got this locked in park right now. Because it's a different transmission, the bell housing's longer, the shifter was too short. So if you look right here, these are actually piston pins from old pistons that I cut the shaft and I welded those in there. It was either that or go out and buy a $200 shifter for the floor, and I didn't want to do that. It's not pretty, but it will work. And I had to do it twice. I couldn't just do one long extension here because of the bend of this. I had to do it in 2 different segments. So I measured twice, and well, I cut twice. So I think it's gonna work. So there's a little cotter key that goes back in here. And that hole, it's like that, and that holds that in place. So that arm did not reach before. You can see where we extended it here. Now it's just a matter of tightening this up, putting a cotter pin here and here, and we're in business. So yeah. Yes. I have a functioning shifter. When you're doing something like this, you got to celebrate all the little victories. I didn't have a shifter before. I didn't have the right length shift arm. Now I have a transmission that shifts, and I didn't have to spend 200 bucks on a floor shifter. Win. Okay guys, so here's what I'm thinking. When it comes to the fuel system on this thing, so the factory fuel lines, there, if you notice, there's our motor mount, our engine mount, and then of course we have this big cross member that goes across here. Well, you can see where I've got that new high pressure fuel line hooked up, and you can kind of see that there's a retaining bracket there. The fuel lines on the S10, it's kind of weird how they do it. They come up the inside of the frame rail on the driver's side of the truck, and then they actually come from inside of this cross member, and they stick out the front there. They just kind of poke out the center of that cross member. And you can see that there's three of them there. The one in the middle is a vent, and then the one on the right hand side there, that is the return line. So it's a return type system, which we're going to keep it that way. So I'm using the factory fuel pump in this thing, which is about 20-25 pounds for TBI. I have to regulate that down, obviously, for the carburetor. So we're going to run a regulator that has a return system on it, and there will be a return hose coming back to that upper receptacle there, going back to the tank. These are the fuel lines that came off of there. This end was hooked up to that, those lines coming out of the frame, and then they ran up behind the motor. They actually came out and they ran up along underneath the steering column into the back of the motor here. Well, I mean, obviously we're going to have a header right here, so we're not going to be able to do that. So, and I don't want to reroute the fuel lines from the tank. The pump in the tank works good. I've got fuel up here when I put power to it. The pump that's in this tank is a TBI pump, so it's going to be 20-25 pounds. That's way too much for a carburetor. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to come off of that line there, and I hate to do it, but I'm probably going to run this line right out of there and around this way. I'm gonna run it up and try to hug the firewall here, and then I'm gonna make a U-turn, and I'm gonna come up and I'm gonna put my regulator right here. I'm gonna have the regulator here, and it's a return line type regulator. So we'll come up here, we'll split the line here, the regulator will be here, and then I'll have a line coming off of the regulator that goes back straight down here to the return. We'll get the fuel line buttoned up against the firewall here and secured, and we'll run it along the firewall here, and then we'll come out from the firewall here to the, we'll have this way, and we'll have come out of the firewall here to the carburetor. I can't really think of any other way to run this fuel line because I'm going to have headers. If I go under the motor into the back, it's going to get into the exhaust system, and I'm really close to the firewall. So if I do it this way, and I can actually insulate the fuel lines here, where the header is going to be way up here, but I can put some insulation here. And this fuel line, this is the push type AN fitting fuel line. This fuel line is good for 250 psi. It's really strong, reinforced steel braided line. I'm only going to have about 20 pounds on it, so it will definitely foot the bill. I got to keep it away from that heat. Now, because I have a return type regulator, the heat's not as big of an issue, but that's really the only way I can see. I thought about coming out under the motor mount and coming up the front of the motor here, but with this pulley setup, there is just no place for these lines to go. It's just not feasible. And I don't really want to come under the motor over here, because then I've got this header and this issue up here. So I think to keep it away from the exhaust and the headers and the heat of the motor, I'm going to come up around. This will probably go up somewhere like this. I'm sure this will be down here. We'll try to hide it as good as possible, but we'll keep this snug up here all the way around as best we can, something like that. And then of course we'll secure it and put heat shielding on it as necessary. But that's basically my fuel system. Now I had to order the regulator. The regulator from fuel injection to carburetor, those suckers are expensive, especially the return type ones. So I ordered a Holley regulator. But I'll try to get this thing plumbed and measured out here, and I'll be back and you'll be able to see what it looks like. I mentioned this, the exhaust system on this the other day. This is the muffler I'm going to use. It's a MagnaFlow. I'm just going to go with a single muffler, and MagnaFlows are, if you look at the dyno test, they are some of the best mufflers out there for flow and for horsepower. Not that I'm looking for a ton of horsepower, but also they sound good. Now, the only thing about the MagnaFlows is over time they have a tendency to get a little louder, because I guess the elements inside burn out over time. But I don't mind a little loud. This is going all the way out the back anyway. So I'm going to come in with a 3-inch, and I'm going to come out back here with 2.5 duals coming out the back. Now the reason I decided to do this is because I watched an episode of Engine Masters, and they did a shootout between dual and single exhaust. The single exhaust system made more horsepower. The 3-inch single exhaust made more horsepower than all the other combinations they did, as long as they had a flow-through muffler. When they put like a restrictive muffler, I'm not going to name names, but there are other popular brands that are more restrictive, the horsepower went way down. So, and because it had a single exhaust, it was trying to push everything from the motor through a restrictive muffler. The MagnaFlows are very unrestrictive, and they made, with a larger diameter single pipe coming into a muffler, they made more horsepower that way than any other way. And then of course I'm going to come out the back with duals back here. So also, I just, if I can wade my way through this mess here, we just picked up the drive shaft that they shortened for us. They shortened it, put all new U-joints in, and balanced it at Precision Driveline. So that's my next step, as I'm going to get under there. I buttoned up a lot of the truck underneath already. If you look at our list here, there's a lot more stuff crossed off of it that I did last night. The next thing is getting the drive shaft in and continuing work on that list. One thing that I did come across, so this is the other S10, the big block Chevy project that you guys know about. You might be wondering why it's all jacked up. Well, my helper lost the U-joint clips for that rear end, so I had to jack it up and pull these off. I'm not using this rear end in here anyway. We're going to put a shortened 9-inch in it. But one thing that I hadn't really looked at before that I discovered, there is a single muffler with duals coming out of it. That's exactly what I need for that other muffler. And also back here, we've got like really cool, I think they were chrome tipped, but I don't care about chrome anyway. But we got a really cool dual exhaust coming out the back, which is surprising because this had a V6 in it, and a 2.8 liter. So, yeah. I also got a spare rear end here. I'm not using this in this truck, so if I end up blowing the other one, the 4-cylinder rear end, I don't know if this is a better rear end or not, but I'll pull this one out and use it. So there's my exhaust system, pretty sweet. So the drive shaft, as you can see, is in. There's our carrier bearing. Now, before, when we had the carrier bearing bolted up there, that yoke up there was cramming itself into that seal. You can't have that because as the suspension moves, you got to have some travel there. So we shortened this front segment, and now we're about halfway in, which is exactly where that yoke needs to be. And so yeah, measure twice, cut once. Depending on what I would recommend too, if you're going to get a drive shaft shortened, call the drive shaft shop, the balance shop, or whoever's working on it, and ask them where they want you to measure. Normally, I would usually, because I did drive shafts years ago, I would measure from the center of the U-joint yoke to the center hole of the carrier bearing here, or from the center of the U-joint yoke here to the center of the yoke there. But this shop had me measure from the seal surface right there at the back of the transmission to the center of those bolts, which is what I did. So yeah, I mean, they did a good job. They put new U-joints in it, they shortened it, they balanced it, and it is perfect. I am starting to get jazzed here because all I really need now to fire this thing up is just to button up a few things here. I need to put the bottom radiator hose on, get coolant in the engine. Now that I have the drive shaft in, I can put the 12 quarts of transmission fluid in. I need to get the HEI ignition and stuff on the wires, but that's easy. The other issue here is this. The steering box. So what I did is I pulled the steering lines off of the big block S10. The high pressure side of this pump is right there where that blue cap is, right on the back of that. That's the high pressure side, and it has to come over to this yellow cap. That's not a very big run. That's really short. I'm not too worried about the low pressure side, which is this C-shaped tube coming off of there, because that you can just put a hose on. So this is off of the other S10. This is the high pressure side, and it has to be a pretty significant hose here. So it goes into the back of the pump, and you can see how long that sucker is. I'm going to measure that, and I'll probably take and have them, and they'll just fabricate another end right about here somewhere with a little bit of hose so I can bend it, and we'll be in business. So that's what I'm going to work on this morning. I'm going to get the power steering buttoned up, get tranny fluid in it, get the ignition and stuff set up, ready for the headers. And also, the other thing is the fuel system. I gotta wait for that stupid regulator. I had to order that. I mean, I can fire it up with my run stand pump if I want to, but I don't know. We'll see. It depends on how long it takes to get that stupid regulator for that fuel system. So I'll get all this stuff buttoned up, and I will be back. Okay, so it's not pretty, but it works. So I came out off of here for my return line. This is actually part of my fuel line that I cut just this 90 degree and going into the box, and then the other high pressure line comes out here, comes up around and down into the back. So the power steering is hooked up, ready to go. Start putting the transmission fluid in. One of the things that I would advise you is don't put all 12 quarts in, because it's going to leak out the vent tube. You're supposed to put 6 quarts in and run the engine, and then put the rest in, because the clearances are so tight in a new transmission. I learned that the hard way, but I only lost like a half a quart, so we're okay. But yeah, we're getting things knocked off the list here. Next, we're going to do the transmission cable and the throttle cable.